Well, hello there. It's been a while, hasn't it? I decided pretty spontaneously to just fire up my recorder, and I reminded myself just now, be careful with your breathing because we're not going to do post-production on this video. The whole point with my YouTube channel, for the most part, is that I want this to be spontaneous content because really, frankly, that's what I consider my strongest weapon, for lack of a better term, as a technical trainer. The fact that Oh, well, there's a lot. The reason I actually want to talk to you is a lesson that I've wrestled with over the years, still continuing to. It deals with that old saying, don't ever meet your heroes. You've ever heard that? And I think the lesson there is your hero you're going to put on a pedestal, and when you realize they're just a regular human being, yeah, that's a hard lesson for me. I'm there now. I've never been afraid to approach people that I'm interested in. I don't care what they look like or what their station of life is. So that means I've been able to interact and get to know people maybe that would be a bit more difficult to, like celebrities and so on. These aren't it's purely subjective. They're celebrities to me. For example, John Romero, you would know who he is if you're a video gamer or in IT. Gary Gygax, the late Gary Gygax, was another friend that I corresponded with. But the lesson here that I want to transmit to you now, let me stop putting it off, is for me, I always need to remember when I'm writing one of my heroes a letter, an email, whatever it might be, to keep two things in mind. One, to recognize that just because I feel connected to this famous person doesn't mean they don't know me from anybody. Maybe they do. Sometimes I've introduced myself to somebody and they did recognize me through my training because I have somewhat of a public profile within my industry. And that's always cool when that happens. But by and large, I plumb forgot what I was going to say. My brain's been having frequent dropouts. It's because I'm wrapping up a long, painful divorce, so life is actually especially good now. But at the same time, sometimes thoughts just drop in and out of my head. I'm being very gentle with myself, reminding myself it'll come back, and it will. But again, that expectation, I think it's eminently human for somebody like for me. When I think of Paul McCartney as my musical hero, I would fanboy all over the place. And he's gracious enough to where he's seen that and he has enough self-awareness to have a good sense of humor about that. The Cars rock band is a group that I'm deeply involved with in terms of fandom. And think of Elliot Easton. I mean, his music and his guitar playing has influenced my guitar playing and influenced my life. And the Cars music has been something I grew up with. So I have a deep interweb nostalgic growth connection with Elliot and with the band. So it's natural that as a fan, I feel connected to him. So when I write a fan letter, I mentioned that I keep two things in mind. One, the truth is, they see this all the time if they're a celebrity. So I'm one of X number of other people whose lives were positively transformed by their creative output. And the second thing is to not be creepy. In other words, to remain polite and to take a cue. And as a guy with autism, the cue thing for me is a challenge, and it really is. I found that being on top of it and aware of it is really helpful because now it comes up in my mind. Oh, wait a minute, spot check, Tim. A big one is don't go with my gut instinct. Most of the time when I just go with my first instinct, it's not very rational. So I've trained myself to pause and to wait for that first quick instinct and then let the more rational higher self, if you want to call that, come through on the second pass. And that seems to work really well. Why do I say this? Why am I inspired to share this? A lot of things. Zoe, actually, my 14-year-old daughter, gave me a lesson over the weekend. And I realized, wow, she had mentioned a couple months ago, Dad, why do you feel entitled to write all of your heroes these letters? You're not special. And she meant that in a loving way. She was being purely rationalistic, and I didn't see it at the time. It took me a week or so, but eventually I cringed a bit because I was like, oof, I went a little far with my fanboying, you know. And here's something else that I think I have a special advantage on as a creative person and as a content creator myself. I know what that feels like in reverse. I know what it feels like because I've had many, many of my learners over the years approach me in person, on a Zoom call, via email, whatever, and bubble over with gratitude and enthusiasm for how my training, for example, has given them a career and now they can support themselves better than they ever thought they could. They can support their families, everything's so much better. So I know what it feels like. I understand their enthusiasm and their desire to connect and hug. And I'm fine hugging, by the way, if we ever meet in person. But it's imbalanced because, of course, like I just explained, I don't know this person at all. Sometimes my learners will give a fan letter and then ask for me to give them a recommendation. And I say, look, I'm open to giving a recommendation, but I'm not going to do one blind. I don't know you. You know what I'm saying? So I guess it's just being a human one-on-one. I'm late to some lessons, really. But one of those lessons, it's kind of a meta lesson that I've discovered about myself in the last year, is that when I know better, I do better. Is that Maya Angelou? I'm not sure if it was before her, but when I know better, I do better. But here's the catch. There are lessons that I'm picking up now at the age of just about 54 that I've been blind and asleep to my whole life. I'm not kidding. And I'm happy to go into some of those maybe in time in these YouTube videos if it works out. But yeah, know thyself. Where did that come from? Know thyself. Well, to thine own self be true is Shakespeare, Hamlet. But some of these old truisms, Maya Angelou, I guess, when you know better, you do better. That's not just a toss-off phrase. I think that these cliches become cliche because of their deep wisdom. And when they're wielded thoughtlessly, sure, it's meaningless platitude. But when embraced with an open mind, totally different situation. So I guess I'll leave it at that. Let me see in my notes. Yeah, self-knowledge, right-sizedness, detecting appropriate level, basically being respectful of boundaries. So I'll give you an example of a contact with a celebrity that went poorly. It's very geeky, by the way. Tom Daniel is a legendary car designer, but not cars, model cars. So a lot of my favorite, is it 124 scale, the traditional plastic car models that my dad and I both grew up doing. I still build those. I'm still into them. And Tom Daniel's always been my favorite artist. And I went to his website and filled out his contact form, or I guess he had his Gmail listed on his contact form. So I sent him an overflowing, enthusiastic fan letter. And I happened to mention, I think this is what did me in. I mentioned, just out of pure innocent curiosity, do you actually know much about auto mechanics? In other words, when you do these supersize, like the Munsters coach, for example, some of these turn into real cars, but do you know the engine? And I don't know if that tweaked him or what, but he wrote such an asshole-ish message back to me. It was laced with what felt like paranoid conspiracy thinking. Basically like, who are you? I don't recognize your name in the model car industry. Why do you want that information? And I was like, oh boy, I stepped in some poop completely innocently. I assumed there was a familiarity because he's been with me since I was a kid. Of course that's not true. Number two, Tom Daniel is as much a human being as I am. He very well could have woken up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, or I just caught him in a bad time. If you catch me at a bad time, you may get a bad response. Now, the difference there is that I do trust myself. I'll make an amend and admit that I'm wrong. I'm not saying Tom Daniel did anything wrong, but I've never heard back from him since. Left a little bit of a sour taste, but I still love his models and continue to build them, But generally, it's been positive. I mean, the fact that I corresponded with the co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons, in terms of nerd cred, that's pretty high up there. I mean, playing D&D with Gary would have been the best, but I can't claim that. But he told me that I reminded him of his son, Luke, and his son is actually carrying on the torch of Dungeons & Dragons from his dad. He's a cool guy. I know him a little bit too. So, I don't know. I hope that you were able to glean a storyline here. Like I told you earlier at the beginning of this video, my intent here isn't to give you a perfect duck face or to wiggle my butt or flex my biceps or to talk about how to be a toxic male, or it's meant to really be as transparent, candid with you as possible in a truly #unfiltered way. And I hope I've accomplished that. Peace.